Welcome to Empowering Seniors. I'm your host, Katherine Ambrose. Today we're talking about the invisible patient, family caregivers. Annalie Kruger is the author of The Invisible Patient, and she's an expert on family caregiving and creating your own family aging plan. Welcome, Annalie.
Thank you, Katherine. It's great to be here.
So delighted to have you fly in to Kansas from Florida to be here. It's such an important topic, and I love your book. It's got so much good information and checklist in there, and so I was really thrilled to have you come here and share this with the state of Kansas and beyond.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So tell us what it means, the invisible patient.
So the invisible patient is the family caregiver, the primary family caregiver who often gets kind of lost in the shuffle of the day-to-day of caregiving. You know, we talk about, most of the time, actually about 58% of adult kids get thrust into the role of family caregiving without ever having any kind of family discussion about the what whens of aging. And so we talk about the family caregiver snowball, where it starts out feeling manageable and doable until the needs and time constraints start really adding up, and then the adult kids are like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? How am I going to navigate this? What I'm doing isn't sustainable.
Mm-hmm. And I heard you say what whens.
The what whens, not the what ifs, but the what whens.
Okay, not the what ifs, but the what whens.
Of aging, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it starts out just kind of helping a little bit here or there. How does it start typically?
So that's usually how it starts. It can start a couple of different ways. One, you get actually like blindsided and thrust into caregiving because dad had a stroke or mom fell and she broke, her hip, and she's the caregiver to dad with dementia, and the kids are like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? 30 years ago, when I started working with families, they all lived down the street from each other, and they could easily kind of pitch in and help out, and there was like a little bit more family dynamics that were a little bit better than nowadays. But when families started moving away from each other, if they didn't invest the time, the effort, the energy, and the resources in maintaining those relationships, then when they get that call that dad had a stroke, they have to figure out, what are we going to do now? Who lives where? Who's got vacation days that you can use? How are we going to manage their new normal for their parents now?
And what's the other way? So that's one way where you're just blindsided.
So the crisis mode, that's the blindsided. And then the others, there's another kind of demographic of adult kids who are just realistic. They're like, mom and dad aren't getting better. They're not getting healthier just because we don't get better and healthier and more mobile as we age. So they're just more, I want to just say maybe proactive mindset of maybe they already had a hospital scare or they had some sort of crisis that got their attention of how ill prepared they really are. Like if mom fell and she broke her hip and the hospital's like, we need the healthcare power of attorney and the living will, and they're like, what are you talking about? We don't know where those documents are. Or we've never talked about if mom needs more care than what she's getting at home, what does that picture look like? So there's kind of a group of people who are, like me, risk averse and be like, hey, I want to get ahead of this while we can so that we don't end up in that crisis mode and then get whatever results we get.
So for those that are planners and risk adverse, they want to plan ahead, what are some ways that they can do that?
Oh, they can do that in a variety of ways. They can start the conversations. And if you're wondering like, well, how do I even broach these topics? Leverage this episode. I learned about aging and the what whens of aging, and we should probably have some conversation about what that looks like. Mom and dad, because the questions always come up with, well, this is great, but how do I broach these topics with mom and dad? And so this is how you can do it. Mom and dad, what do you have in place? What are your goals as you age? They're going to say, I want to age in place at home, and I don't want to be a burden on my kids, which is what they pretty much all say. Then it's like, that's great. Let's unpack that a little bit. What does that look like? What do you have in place? Where are you financially? So that's the other thing is families don't talk about any of this. So the kids, when they do end up in crisis mode, they have no idea what's in place, what's in order, where are these documents, who's the financial planner, who's the attorney. They're very ill prepared, and that's not comfortable. So different ways to start these conversations, leverage this segment, say, mom and dad, I love you, but we're in uncharted territory here. We should probably have some conversation about what does that look like when you age, and if you need care or when you need care. Leverage that hospital stay. Maybe they just got out of the hospital, or maybe they just had a weight loss or a medication change or a new diagnosis. You know, these are all writings on the wall that we probably should have some conversation about what this looks like.
So how many people do you think, just looking kind of at statistics or just human nature, how many people are risk averse and plan ahead versus people that don't really do what they need to do?
So I can share with you that the majority of the population seems to be waiting until crisis mode. But on their behalf, things can change quickly. All the people that had major strokes last Thursday didn't wake up thinking, oh, I'm going to have a major stroke.
Yeah.
But it happens all the time. Or I didn't wake up thinking I'm going to have a heart attack. So these things, these emergencies can creep up on you quickly. But that you should leverage and say, hey, you know, we are ill prepared for this. We need to actually put an aging plan in place. And the other thing is too, a little bit of denial.
Yeah.
Oh, mom and dad are doing fine. Well, they're really not, because there are definite red flags that a lot of family caregivers or families tend to ignore, like weight loss, ER visits, hospitalizations, falls, memory impairment, mom not tracking when you're calling her and you're like, wow, she just seemed really off. Well, maybe she's got some memory impairment, or she's got a urinary tract infection brewing. You know, so trying to educate adult kids and families in general about just what these red flags look like, and don't ignore them because they are not going to go away.
Right. And don't wait till the red flag is so huge. Pick up on it a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
So when do people tend to take action as those red flags flare?
So they tend to take action when they're, unfortunately, in total crisis mode, total burnout as a family caregiver, like adult children having to leave, you know, their job for a period of time because mom fell again and she's the caregiver to dad with dementia, and the kids are like bouncing back and forth from state to state, and emergency airfare is not $69 on Frontier. When you get that call that, you know, you're in New York, but mom and dad live in Tucson, Arizona, that's $1,200 airfare, because you got to be there tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
So those are different things that you can be aware of. Is, you know, when you start having those emergency crisis trips, or your relationships at home are starting to be negatively impacted, where your spouse or your partner or your kids are like, Mom, you just don't seem like yourself. You're always moody, you're grumpy, or just even your own bodily messages are there. Like you're tired, you're anxious, you're moody, you're not sleeping, you're overeating. You know, really look at your own kind of, you know, how your body is responding to stress, and not ignore that.
I read recently that a lot of times your body picks up on things before your brain does.
That is correct. That is correct. And so we want to avoid, you know, if we have an aging plan in place, then that can avoid that caregiver burnout, where that caregiver snowball just keeps, you know, the demands of the needs of the parents start to exceed what you're able to really physically do for them. And so we want to avoid that eventual feeling of anger, resentment. My life is out of control. Every time you try to fall asleep at night, you're like, oh, did dad fall because he didn't answer my phone call? We want to avoid all that angst. And that is possible when you actually put a strategy and a plan in place.
And it does take a lot of strategy. I mean, you need to know the financial situation, because there's a lot of strategy involved, especially if money is tight. And because so many people do want to age at home, can you address the, you know, how realistic that is, or what tends to happen?
So what tends to happen, because that is my long-term working with families, they all want to age in place at home, but what they're not really looking at, because they don't know what they don't know, you know, and so what that really looks like is it can be very costly. So the reality of a lot of people being able to actually age in place at home is pretty small. I mean, look around. Everywhere in the world, we're in that silver tsunami. So all new construction is what? Senior housing, right? So the reality of people being able to truly age in place at home is pretty minimal, because it's expensive. You know, home care can be very expensive. It's a great thing if you can afford it and you can find quality, trained, reliable, dependable, compassionate care workers, but that's kind of a tall order sometimes.
And what can that range?
So that can range anywhere It depends on where you are locally, or across the globe, but it can be anywhere from 25 to I have clients paying $60 an hour. So, there's families out there paying $30, $40, $50, $60,000 a month trying to stay at home because if you have, we'll use my parents as an example. My dad is 6'4". My mom was obese, diabetic, and had mild cognitive impairment. So, when my dad had his stroke, if he would have needed long-term home care, he's a tall guy. He would have needed 2 companions for safety. My mom would have needed her own person. So that's 3 people in the house 24/7, and that's how that
can add up
yeah.
to like 30 or 60 or 70,000 a month.
And I want to just be very crystal clear, because so many families assume that Medicare or Medicaid pay for all of this, and the absolute answer is no, it does not. If you want someone else to foot the bill, you needed to get long-term care insurance or veteran VA benefits, but most of this is out of pocket. So that's why it's like, what is our financial runway for how long mom and dad can actually stay at home so they don't break the bank and then jeopardize future care options because they're stuck in today.
And people can really go through all their money and
quickly
before they make a move, and then that limits their options financially on how nice of a setting they can go. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so when we talk about people wanting to age in place at home, they kind of assume that it's just going to work out that way. But yet all of these people, all these residents in long-term care communities and assisted livings and memory cares, they also had that same goal, but where are they? They're in a care community. So what a lot of consumers don't realize is you have to financially, physically, behaviorally, and cognitively qualify to get into these different care communities. So if you break the bank, so to speak, staying at home, and now you only financially qualify and need to get on Medicaid, then you end up in a nursing home. Well, then that's often how mom and dad end up getting separated because there was no aging plan in place. So you have one parent in one care community, the other in a different care community. There's also different care, they're called CCRCs, continuing care retirement communities, that have all of the different levels of care, which are great if you can afford them and you can qualify to get in. But even with those business models, some of them, their business model is you had to have moved in the independent living level. You can't wait until you're too sick, because then you don't qualify for independent living. And you can't move in mid-care level like assisted living. But other continuing care communities you can. So that's why it's like, you need to know what the landscape of senior care is and what's the affordability, what's the waiting list. Just because you want to get in doesn't mean you qualify, and doesn't mean that that they have an opening for you.
Yeah, and being on waiting list is really
huge,
appropriate. And that doesn't mean you have to move.
You can
when
always
you get
turn
called.
them down when you get the call. Like even with my parents, I had them on the waiting list for over a decade because I don't want to leave my parents. We spend our whole life planning, so why would we be willy-nilly at the most dependent, vulnerable years of their life?
Well, and so you know the system, you know how things work, so you don't want your parents to end up in a negative situation. So that's why you were proactive a dozen years in advance.
And even if you do have yourselves on the waiting list, hopefully the moms and dads are being like more proactive about their aging plan. But often, in my experience, it's the adult kids who are doing all these tours because mom and dad can't do the tours anymore because they're too sick or they're in the hospital or they're too demented to be able to make these decisions. So it is the adult kids picking out their facility. I know that's a t-shirt, but that's because that is what happens all the time if you don't have an aging plan in place. So, even if you are on different waiting lists to get into different care communities, don't have that be a one and done tour. You can be in that building, have presence throughout the year and keep touring throughout the year, because if they have change in leadership, that could definitely affect the quality of care delivery. Keep that relationship so that if you ever would need to move into that care community, you have more updated familiarity with how they operate.
Yeah, and the people that are there.
Yes.
And so you can go have meals, you can participate in things.
Right.
Feel I think a little less fearful too, because
Right.
you already have that plan in place. So what does an aging plan look like so that things turn out, hopefully the best they possibly can?
Yep, different components of an aging plan are what's working well. Family meetings, what's working well could be mom is doing okay with laundry and her medications, but she's lost 10 pounds in the last 2 months, so there's obviously something going on with, is she able to cook? Does she have stamina to be able to cook, or is she eating garbage, or is she not eating at all? So what is working well, what is not working well, and everyone in the family will have their own idea and perception of how well things are really going. But that's why you want to start these conversations and not be afraid of them, but have these conversations now about what's working well, what's working less well. Well, dad is getting lost, or he's driving and now he's got 7 more dings in his car. So obviously that's a red flag, right? So, and then what are the goals? Mom and dad will, like I said, they will say, I want to age in place at home and I don't want to be a burden on the kids. The kids' goals are usually the same. I just want mom and dad to be safe, happy, have the best quality of life and the best quality of care possible. Only way to do that is through an aging plan. Where are you financially? I can't tell you how many families, the kids have no idea what their parents have for finances, if they have long-term care insurance, if dad was a veteran and he's using aid and attendance. They have no idea because they've never talked about it. So what is in place? Where are the gaps in your planning? And when these adult kids see how expensive care is, then they're like, ooh, I should probably get some sort of financial solution to help offset the cost of care, right? So it's really education. When you do an aging plan, it's really educating yourself so that you can make informed decisions. We talk about it, because an aging plan is a very robust process that we use. And so it's what are the care options in the area? If mom and dad live in Tucson, Arizona, does it make sense for them to stay in Tucson, Arizona if their 4 kids live in 4 different states? Are you really expecting people to fly back and forth every time there's a problem? Because again, we don't get stronger as we age. So we know that someone is going to have to step in as an advocate, whether it's a professional advocate or family takes that on, or a combination of both. So it's really laying out, what does it look like if we stay at home? Is the house even senior safe? Can mom and dad afford to stay at home? What are the shortfalls about that decision? What if mom needs one level of care, dad needs a different level of care? And then looking at the big picture of if they can't stay at home.
Yeah.
And getting all their documents in order.
Okay, so just a strategy. And then you talk about a grab and go bag. What is a grab and go bag, and where do you keep it? And what should you keep with you when you're out and about?
So there's 2 things. There's a grab and go binder, which is all of your documents in order. Who's your financial planner? Who are all your doctors and specialists? Who's the estate attorney? Who's all of that? What are your legal plans that you have in order? So there's a legal tab in there. So your estate documents, divorce decrees, adoption records, litigation, all of that kind of stuff. Insurance, what do you have for insurance? All things insurance. Take a picture of your insurance cards and stuff like that. VA paperwork or discharge plan, VA discharge paperwork, pet sections, a business succession plan. So that's the grab and go digital binder, but most people will compile all of their information and print it and put it in their own little binder.
Okay.
And then the grab and go bag is different, because that's what you want to have in place so that when you get that call, I have a grab and go bag in my car at all times, because that way when my mom was always, she had dementia and she was falling a lot. And so I have a phone charger, I have an extra fleece blanket in there because the ER is very, very cold. And I have puzzles and different things for, my parents to do if they're in the hospital, and water and snacks for me.
And so I read in your book you got hit by a bus when you were 40 years of age.
I did.
And so how did you maybe respond to that differently than a layman might? Because you were you didn't want to get hit by a bus, but you were prepared.
I was prepared because I do crisis management. That's what we do. And so so I already had my grab and go binder done, because I've learned from other people's mistakes what what not to do and what to do. And so what I carry with me, you don't carry your whole binder with you because that's got your accounts, your password, that's got like your whole life in it. And if your car ever got broken into, like that's so not good.
Right.
So what you want to carry what you want to carry with you, or what you may want to think about carrying with you, which is what I do, is I carry my healthcare power of attorney, my living will, my do not resuscitate, and my little Post-it note of who to call if you find me along the street and I'm incoherent. So when I got hit by the bus, it was awful, but at least I already had all my stuff in order. My 2 siblings know everything that they need to know to step in and make decisions had I lost consciousness or died.
And really, this is for someone, it's not just about empowering seniors, but it's for any adult 18 years of age or older that these things should be in place.
And really, you know, because sometimes our parents are like, oh, you're just picking on me because I had a hospital stay. You know, that's why they don't want to confide in like how things aren't going well for them at home, because they're like, oh, no, the kids will come in and take me into a facility and they don't want that. But, you know, with this piece of an aging plan, like the grab and go binder piece, like that's a project the whole family could do together, is like a family team building project of like, mom and dad, we all have to do this. So we're all getting our estate documents done and we're all filling all this paperwork out so that it is in order.
So what's the danger if you don't have the healthcare POA and you don't have some of these things?
Yeah, so the problem is most people find themselves blindsided by a crisis. And then when you get that crisis call that dad had a stroke and he's had a major stroke and he's not coherent, and then the doctor's like, okay, Katherine, who's the power of attorney? What are you going to do? Like, what healthcare decisions? And you're like, I don't know. We've never talked about this. And you don't even have a copy of the paperwork, right? And so the downside of not having your affairs in order is cost and the angst of being ill-prepared. Because then what do you have to do? You have to hire an attorney and pay buku bucks to come out at the hospital, make sure that they can sign paperwork and stuff like that. So otherwise, you know, the downside is you end up having to pay a lot of money for emergency guardianship and conservatorship. And that could have all been avoided had we had our paperwork in place and updated in the first place.
Well, and I think we've heard horror stories too, where a court has appointed a stranger to be conservator or guardianship, and so then the kids have to spend a lot of money to get that straightened out, or they just have to give up.
Right. If the family ends up becoming the guardian, it's like a business. Like you have to keep spreadsheets. I mean, it is a lot of work. You have to account for every penny that was spent. You can't move them from one community to a different community without going to court. I mean, it is expensive. So wouldn't it just make more sense? Just get your estate documents done proactively versus waiting until crisis mode and having this like major expense, but also just the angst. Because when you get that call that dad had a stroke, where would you rather be? At the hospital, at dad's bedside, rather than running around ragged looking for some blue folder that dad always talked about? This is my death folder.
Right.
Where is it? And then to find out none of the paperwork that you thought would be in there is in there.
So create peace of mind so you can be a family member rather than like the emergency paperwork shuffler and, you know, doing emergency calls. And just create that peace of mind, because everybody's probably thinking about all these things anyway. It's just something that people don't necessarily want to talk about. But knowing that these conversations can be easy and they make everyone feel better is a good way to go. And I think referencing your book as an example, or this episode, that Mom, I saw the show, or I read this book, and this is what I think we should talk about.
And leveraging a recent hospital stay. Mom, we made it through this crisis, but when there's another one, we want to be much more prepared, because if it matters to you, you want to have a say in what happens to you as you age and how far the medical community goes with your care, right? So the only way to safeguard yourself is have it all documented and communicated.
Well, good to know. Thank you so much, Ann-Lee, for being on the show and for your brilliant book.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And thank you for watching this episode. If you have questions about this topic or anything that we cover, please reach out to us at empoweringseniors@kpts.org or give us a call at 316-686-4500. I'm Katherine Ambrose, and I'll see you on the next Empowering Seniors.